Thank you to our ringers. You know, there are some things that you have discovered in life that you can come to count on, some things that seem to be just true. Like the cliche says that death and taxes are true, that it's just going to happen. I think we've seen pretty consistently Congress is going to be dumb, which is kind of a fact. Government's not going to work. Something else I think that we've grown to the point that we can bank on, and that's that the ice cream machine at McDonald's is not going to work. There was a season of time, what I would call a bigger season of time for me, where I was regularly going to get a milkshake or some ice cream, and Cookout was one of my favorites, but sometimes I would change it up. And I had heard people talking about, and there had been kind of a standing joke about the ice cream machine not working at McDonald's. And I remember one night, I don't know what I was trying to get. It was a McFlurry, a McSomething, a sundae. I don't know what it was. I bet it was an ice cream sundae because they used to be cheap. And I'd gone to try to get one of those, and they said, the ice cream machine's down. Oh, you know, I've heard people talking about that. So I thought, I'm going to try another McDonald's. I went to another McDonald's. The ice cream machine was down. And I was like, you know what? This is a thing. I don't even know if you're aware of this, but certainly there are memes and there's all kinds of stuff that you'll see online that make a joke about the ice cream machine being down at McDonald's, but there's actually a website, McBroken.com. I'm dead serious. If you go to McBroken.com, you can see across the country, people have logged, which I know that's what you're doing now. You're not looking at your Bible. You're seeing whose ice cream machine is broken. But it's a thing. I'm like, holy cow, this really is a big deal. Now, with respect to these machines, apparently the problem is that they are complicated. They have a 4-hour cleaning cycle, and so once it has to go into that cycle, it takes 4 hours to do this. If it has some sort of problem, it has to be reset, but it can only be reset by a particular individual. I don't know. It's probably somebody with a big old wad of keys. I don't know. But there's something special has to be done to be able to reset this. And the reality is, it's not that the machine is always broken. But we have kind of gotten to the point where we just tell ourselves, yeah, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to try to get ice cream at McDonald's because, well, the machine's broken. Now, that type of attitude we would characterize with this word, cynicism. You're saying that's a cynical attitude. And cynicism is ultimately birthed out of waiting or disappointment, and it continues to harden. And it continues to harden to the point that you just decide, well, this is just how it is. And sometimes we get to that point and we get cynical as an expression of self-preservation. We're trying to, well, it's reasonable, it's smart to do this. This kind of protects my emotions that I'm just going to kind of decide this is how things are. And it's okay if you do that with the ice cream machine at McDonald's, but it gets a little more complicated when we start doing this stuff with God, when we start doing this stuff with spiritual things. Let me give you some examples of some spiritually cynical statements. Well, there's no use going to church because it's just full of hypocrites. That's a cynical statement. There's no use praying because I prayed, it doesn't do anything, and so I'm not going to waste my time doing this because nothing's going to happen. The intention is not to land in some negative point, but there has been this waiting, there has been this lack of fruition that you have experienced, and you get to the point where you are cynical. And again, it's okay to be cynical about McDonald's, cynical about their ice cream machine, but it gets very dangerous when we start getting cynical about spiritual things, in particular when we start getting cynical towards God. Now, we're going to see today that this has happened to the individual and the couple that we've been looking at. It has been Abram and Sarai, and we're going to see that their names get changed. We finally get to know them as Abraham and Sarah. And they're old. And God has told them, even though that Sarah was barren, you're going to have a child. Abraham, you're going to be this father of a great nation. But the clock has been ticking. And it's been ticking not just for months, it's been ticking for years. And finally, it seems that they've gotten to a point where their attitude towards God is cynical. And as we continue looking at Abraham's life, It gives us the answer to the question that we want to think about today. How can I tell if I have grown? How can you tell if you have grown cynical towards God? Look with me. We're actually going to see two passages. They're right next to each other. First is in Genesis 17. Genesis 17, starting with verse 15. We're told at this point, God said to Abraham, "As for your wife, Sarai, do not call her Sarai, for Sarah will be her name. I will bless her indeed. I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she will produce nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." Abraham fell face down, and then he laughed to himself. Laughed and said to himself, "Can a child be born to a 100-year-old man? Can Sarah, a 90-year-old woman, give birth?" So Abraham said to God, "If only Ishmael were acceptable to you." But God said, "No, your wife Sarah will bear a son, and you will name him Isaac. I will confirm my covenant with him as a permanent covenant for his future offspring." Skip down to chapter 18 and look with me starting at verse 9. There are these angels that have appeared, and they ask this question to Abraham in verse 9. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he answered. The Lord said, "I will certainly come back to you in about a year's time, and your wife Sarah will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent behind him. Abraham and Sarah were old and getting on in years. Sarah had passed the age of childbearing, so she laughed to herself, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I have delight?" But the Lord asked Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Can I really have a baby when I'm old? Is anything impossible for the Lord?' At the appointed time, I will come back to you, and in about a year she will have a son." Sarah denied it. What she denies is laughing. She said, "I did not laugh," she said, because she was afraid. But he said, "No, you did laugh." Abraham and Sarah are people that have a relationship with God, but it's not perfect. And there's ups and downs, and we have been looking at this series of this guy that stands for us and for all these generations as an example. Hebrews 11 describes him as one that's part of this faith hall of fame. This is a guy that has a stack of stumbles and failures, and we're trying to learn from his failures and the hazards that he experienced that can be hazards and can ensnare us. And if it could happen to Abraham and to his wife, it could happen to me and you, that we could get cynical towards God. Well, how can you tell if that is the case for you? One of the ways is this: pragmatism guides your thinking. Pragmatism guides your thinking. Pragmatism is not achy joints, that's rheumatism. Pragmatism is when we're talking about that which is pragmatic, which says, if it works, it's okay. I'm just going to think about not what is best, just if it works. So duct tape is pragmatic. What does it work on? Well, about anything. That's pragmatic. You can tell that you've gotten cynical towards God when pragmatism guides your thinking. So context-wise, what's going on here is in chapter 17, you have God has reaffirmed the commitment that he has with Abram. He changes his name to Abraham, which is a name that means father of many nations. And so he's reaffirming the promise that he had given years before, and that he's going to make of him and from him this great nation. And he says that Sarah's name it'll no longer be Sarai, it'll be Sarah, which is a name that means princess or queen. And to say that she is going to be the one that's going to bear this child that is going to, through their progeny, spawn all of these others. He says, "I will bless her. She'll produce nation. Kings of people will come from her." And in verse 17, we see that Abraham does something. He falls face down. And so many times in the Bible, when somebody falls face down towards God, it is a sign of respect and honor and awe. They're falling down in worship towards God. Perhaps it is that was the initial reaction that leads Abraham to fall down, but his response afterwards seems to indicate that maybe he just kind of plopped down, not out of reverence or awe, but of exasperation, because we're told that he laughs. And as he laughs, he starts talking. It says that he said to himself, whether this was out loud or whether it was just a thought. Either way, God knew it. God was aware of it. And the thought is, Can a child be born to a 100-year-old man? Well, that's a dumb question. No. Bill Belichick has probably asked himself that same question. That one was free. Anyway, can a 100-year-old man have a child? And you can see later in the detail of the text, he's talking here in round numbers. He's 99. The difference between he and Sarah we believe to be roughly 10 years. So he's 99, she's 89. And so he has just been told by God, hey, let me just remind you, what I said years before is still on the table. This is still on the horizon. This is still going to happen. You're going to have this child, even though she's not had any children, she's going to have one. A child is going to come, not just from you, but from you and her, and from this is going to be a great nation that I have established and will establish this covenant binding relationship. And Abraham starts thinking, yeah, that can't happen. That can't happen because, well, I'm 100. I'm 100, she's 90. We're just too old for this stuff. So the clock has been ticking, and we've been listening to it tick so long that door is now shut. So much so that he has heard the promise of God and he laughs. Yeah, right. Fat chance of that happening. And he asks this question, can a child be born to 100? Okay, that's logic, that's reason operating. This is where cynicism starts to produce itself. Look at his statement at the end of verse 18. He says, if only Ishmael were acceptable to you. You remember, we've already looked at this before, where God has made this promise, hey, I'm going to make you, Abram, this father of a great nation, descendants as numerous as the sand on the shore, as the stars in the sky, that's going to come from you, and it's going to come from you and Sarah, and nothing seems to happen. And when the clock keeps ticking, Sarah suggests to Abraham, how about you take Hagar, my servant? Why don't you take her and you can conceive a child with her and we'll raise this child as if it's our own. That'll be the way that this promise happens. And so how long has that happened in the past? 13 years. Ishmael is no longer a potential. Ishmael is no longer an idea. Ishmael is real. He's walking around. He's already got zits all over his face. He's 13 years old. And Abraham is hearing God say, well, a child is going to be born, and from this child is going to be this great lineage. I'm 100, she's 90. How about Ishmael? Because it seems like the clock has ticked too long. That was plan A. But since plan A couldn't work, since plan A didn't work, I've come up with something that plan B will be pretty good. So how about we'll just do this through Ishmael? We don't need the miraculous. We can deal now with the manageable. We can deal with the one that's already here, that's already walking around, the one that's already saying, calling me dad. And what's God's response? Well, his response was no. That's not the plan. But Abraham he's been waiting, and he's been waiting with disappointment that continues to harden, so much so that he gets cynical towards God, and he stops leaning, he stops trusting, and finally decides, well, we've got to have a solution, so anything that we can come up with, how about we just come up with a solution and we'll stamp God's name on it, we'll write his name on it, we'll say that's it, and that'll do. Maybe you've been there. Maybe not thinking about necessarily with children, but there's some other circumstance. You felt as though God has impressed upon you. There's this promise that he has given in his word. There is something that he has said, that he's communicated to you through his spirit in your heart, that this is going to happen. You keep waiting and waiting, and the clock keeps ticking and gets later and later, and the trust gets increasingly thin and weak, and finally you get to the point, I'm just going to protect myself, and you grow cynical towards God, and you finally, I'm just going to do this, and we'll say that was God's solution. That's it. well, you've grown cynical towards God. This is nothing new. People have consistently operated where if plan A doesn't work, you come up with plan B. Many of you remember that the company Apple back in the 90s was not the company that it is today. I mean, not even a shadow of the company that it is today. In fact, Apple in the 90s was getting ready to go under. And Steve Jobs came up with this device that was going to be this multifunctional tool that people were going to really rely on, and you could interact with it, and it could think, and it could you could talk to it and ask it questions, and it could give you answers, and you could write on it, and it would translate that into typed text. It was called the Apple Newton, and maybe some of you remember that. I don't know if any of you ever bought one back in the 90s, so this product came out. And so it was heralded as being, I mean, this is where the future is. And Apple's bringing it to you in the form of Apple Newton, which, that's too close to fig. Anyway, so this product comes to market, but it is not well received because it doesn't work as it was billed. Particularly, the handwriting recognition was terrible. If you were to write "Dear Mom," apparently the Newton would write "near mud." If you wrote "New York," it would produce egg yolk. If you wrote "sales meeting," it would put salsa dancing. It became a punchline. It started getting mocked even in the Simpsons episodes. And the promise, what was given, that this is going to be the personal digital assistant that's going to revolutionize everything, that's plan A, and this is going to be it. This is what's going to be our ticket to success as a company. Well, it seems that's not going to happen. And so when that got scoffed at, plan B was to start producing beige boxes like everybody else was and just try to hang on. And they did so just barely. And we're getting ready to really be belly up until plan A was brought back to the fore in the form of what you came to know as the iPhone and then the iPad. And all of those things that initially were promised that you thought was going to happen, finally they are brought to fruition. But the thought was, well, if A doesn't work, plan A doesn't manifest itself, if this isn't happening, I better come up with something. I better come up with a beige box. And that's exactly what Abraham does with God. Well, if plan A isn't working, let's just come up with plan B. Plan B will be Ishmael, and from him we can have this nation, this promise can be fulfilled. And I have created this solution, and I'll be glad to just erase my name. I'll write your name on it, and we'll be okay. We'll just go from here. That demonstrates that my trust, that your trust towards God's not where it needs to be, not where it should be, not where he wants it to be, that we've effectively grown hard towards God, that we've grown cynical towards God. And you can tell because it's not trust, it's not dependence that's guiding your thinking, it's pragmatism. Any solution will work. Listen, God wants me to operate with this notion. If he gives to me what plan A is, I never need plan B. If he gives me plan A, I never need plan B. He's told this to Abraham repeatedly. The clock has been ticking, and they keep thinking it just doesn't seem it's going to happen, so we'd better come up with something. And God's trying to say to Abraham, you don't need that. Let me remind you, I'm going to make plan A happen. But you can tell that you've grown cynical towards him when that faith, that confidence, that trust isn't guiding your thinking, but rather pragmatism is. There's another way, and that's this, that doubt becomes difficult to hide. Doubt becomes difficult to hide. So there is this encounter between the Lord and Abraham in chapter 17, and then in chapter 18, there are these three visitors. These are angelic messengers that appear to, in the presence of Sarah. Abraham is at this tent, and the question is asked, where is your wife Sarah? And listen, God doesn't ask questions questions aren't posed because he doesn't know the answer. He's leading, it's an invitation to speak. And so Abraham says, well, she's in the tent, but it's clear that she can hear what's going on. And God says to Abraham, I'm going to show back up here in a year. And in a year, Sarah is going to have a son. But Sarah is there at the tent, and she's got her ear to the flap, and she hears this that's going on. And maybe she stuck her ear out because her ear is 90 years old. Anyway. So, verse 11, Abraham and Sarah were getting old. They're getting on in years. And it says that she had passed the age of childbearing. That phrase literally means that she has passed or gone beyond the path of women, which is to say that biologically the clock has been ticking and it has stopped. She is just too old to have a baby at this point. And so the word of the Lord has just been repeated. She's going to have a baby. And what does she do? It says that she laughs to herself. And she says, after I am worn out and my Lord is old. So we are just old coots at this point, and we're going to have fat chance. I'm old, he's ancient. Both of us should be in an antique store. We're not going to the labor and delivery unit. This is, from her perspective, this is funny. This is laughable. What God is saying is effectively fodder for a joke. And then in verse 13, we're told that the Lord asked Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Now again, she's in the tent. She's not visibly present. The thought is, because remember the interaction begins, well, where is Sarah? Well, she's in the tent, which is to say she's not part of this conversation. She's asleep, she's busying herself doing whatever, so she's not involved in this. The message of the Lord gets repeated that she's going to have a child, and then her voice is heard laughing. And the question is, why did she laugh? In fact, why did she laugh saying, can I really have a baby when I'm old? Now, whether she actually voiced that out loud or whether it was the thought, we don't know, but what we do know is this: God knew it. God heard the laugh, and God knew the thought. And so the question to Abraham, why is this going on, and how does Sarah feel? The question is given, is anything impossible for the Lord? But what does Sarah do in response to this? She's been called on the carpet. She's been said, what are you laughing about? And what does she say? Well, I didn't laugh. I don't know who that was. I mean, those of you who are parents or teachers, you've experienced this so many times. So I don't know. It just who did it? Well, it wasn't me. You're the only one here. Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Why does she do this? Because it's pretty clear that Sarah understands it wasn't a matter of laughing. It was a matter of who she was laughing at. And that she was laughing at the Lord. But from her perspective, she would probably say this: I couldn't help it. I mean, really, I'm an old biddy. I'm in Elsie Sunday school class. I am too old to have a child. This is not going to happen. She laughs. That is indicative of how cynicism works. When you start getting cynical towards God, even though you might say the right things, and the face that you put on, that you demonstrate, is communicating the right message, it gets difficult to hide. She might have been saying, oh, yes, we trust God. Yes, God has said this is name. Yes, but now when push comes to shove, she's laughing because doubt in the heart of the cynic becomes difficult to hide. It just manifests itself. I've described this before, though, but it is the case, and probably with most marriages and most relationships in general, it seems that most of us operate with the pretense that we're really the only people that can drive. Don't you think that? Like when you're on Wendover, do you think anybody else on Wendover can drive? No. especially if they get in the Walmart or Sam's parking lot. Can anybody else drive? No. And so we operate that way. But even within marriage, and truth be told, Caroline and I probably believe that the other one, if pressed, is not a good driver. And so when I ride with Caroline, I am under the notion that the brake doesn't work really well. And it should be applied much sooner than when it is applied. She is operating under the notion that I am Ray Charles, and that anything that is visible is invisible to me, and it needs to be pointed out. Don't you see that car coming out, don't you? No, I didn't see that one at all. And so, and truth be told, we probably both try to keep it in check, but sometimes it's hard. And if Caroline is driving, sincerely, plenty of times I have told myself, and she may not believe it, it's the honest truth, there are plenty of times that I have been wanting to say, hey, are you going to hit the brake? Are we going to stop before making contact with them? And I won't say it. I'll tell them, don't do it. Don't do it. But you know what I do? Maybe it's just Japanese cars, I don't know, but ours have these imaginary pedals on the passenger side that you can press, and it's like magic. It doesn't make the car stop, it does make you feel better by pressing that imaginary pedal. But so I'll do that, and Caroline will say something along the lines of, you don't like my driving? You don't trust my driving? Oh, no, I do. I was just stretching my leg, cramping the old hip here. But the truth is, I think she hits the brake too late. It gets to the point when that's how you really feel, it gets difficult to hide. When you get that way towards God, you might say the right things, and you might say it in Sunday school, and you might say it in a small group, and you might say it in the break room, and you might say it to your family. But I'm telling you, eventually it comes out. When you're waiting on God and it doesn't seem to be happening how you thought, how you anticipated, what you expected, and the cracks begin to form, you start getting cynical towards God. You start coming up with pragmatic solutions. How can I make this happen? God's not doing it. I need to make sure that this happens. And that doubt begins to harden, and it gets to the point where it's going to come to the fore. In Sarah's case, it came out as laughter. She's literally laughing at God. And that's why she's afraid. Not that she's laughed, but she realizes, oh, oops, I've laughed at God. But what does God do with cynics? How did he respond? Well, a year later, he did exactly what he said he was going to do. And this is the cool part. He told them, I want you to name this child Isaac, a name that means laughter. In some ways, you could argue that naming this little boy Isaac a name laughter was God kind of pouring salt in the wound, that it was a rebuke. But in other ways, it's God demonstrating that he kind of gets the last laugh. And what they had viewed was a hopeless situation, they get to the point where they look back and they probably laugh. Laugh at their lack of trust. Laugh at the lame, inferior solutions that they had improvised. Laughing at the fact that God caused this to happen at such a late stage in their life. But God was not, I think, calling them to call his name Isaac to say, I told you so, but it was effectively to remind them, I believe, of this, that what you thought was impossible is possible with me. I'm the one for whom nothing is too difficult. The reality is you and I can be honest with God. And he's bigger than my doubts. He's bigger than your doubts. He's bigger than my cynicism. He's bigger than my and your lack of confidence. But his question to you is exactly, I think, the question as it was that you see in verse 14 of chapter 18. Is anything impossible for the Lord? That phrase, the word that's used there is impossible, can also equally be translated too wonderful. Is anything impossible, or is anything too wonderful for the Lord? Listen, the answer is no. It's just not. God is bigger than your cynicism. You can bring him your plan B. You can bring him your honest laughs and doubts. But he's faithful enough to be able to take your cynicism and turn it into a reason for joy. Will you bow your heads with me?